Your Honor, the state will show that Dr. Campbell blatantly and willfully ignored the federal and state-approved definition of reading and the advocacy of best practices. She has knowingly ignored the guidelines and pursued behavior that has jeopardized the state's educational improvement efforts.
Your Honor, this case involves accusations that should have never been made and certainly not directed against my client, Dr. Helen Campbell. These charges are an attempt to censor alternative perspectives and to constrain a critical examination of important issues in the field of education today. Now, the prosecutor may challenge my client's critiques of federal and state guidelines with regards to reading research and methods, but Dr. Helen Campbell has a right and an academic freedom to make those critiques, and that cannot be questioned. Thank you.
For the record, Dr. Smith, please describe your current position and the reason for your testimony here today.
I am the chair of the federal panel, responsible for compiling and reviewing reading, research, and evidence related. The panel was established in 1997 through federal legislation entitled the Reading Excellence Act. The 12 members of the panel analyze and review reading research in accordance with federal guidelines.
How is reading defined according to the guidelines in this act?
Reading is defined as a system of meaning derived from print, which requires phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension.
Based on your examination of Dr. Campbell's curriculum, does her definition of reading comply?
No. She discusses competing views and those which are contradictory to the definition.
And how does the legislation define scientifically based research?
Basically, it relies on measurements and observable methods used across observers and evaluators and across multiple measurements and observations. It is also limited to research that has been published in scholarly peer-reviewed journals or have been evaluated by independent panels of experts.
Have you reviewed Dr. Campbell's body of research?
Yes, I have.
Does her research meet the scientific standards your panel has set out?
Some of it does, but some of it does not.
Which research does not?
I cannot say specifically, but it is clear that over the past 5 years, her work has become less experimental and more qualitative.
What does less experimental mean?
Her work fails to meet the criteria of the legislation. Qualitative work is less controlled for bias and usually does not meet standards of reliability. In such studies, there tends to be a loss of rigorous control, a lack of randomization, and an inability to generalize from the conclusions.
Based on your review of the class notes, did Dr. Campbell refer specifically to her own research in the course?
Yes, she did, and she critiqued the definition of scientific.
Dr. Smith, what is your background in literacy education?
I have a doctorate in education with a specialization in child development.
But you are not specialized in reading?
No, not specifically.
Your panel, however, is interested in influencing classroom reading practices. Is that correct?
Yes, we are interested in proven, scientifically based practices.
So members on your panel would need to have knowledge in various forms of research and reading as well as classroom teaching practices.
Yes, of course.
Dr. Smith, how many members on your panel have elementary teaching experience?
I'm not exactly sure of the numbers.
Your Honor, I am in receipt of documents that show that, in fact, none of the members of the panel have any elementary teaching experience, and few have themselves researched reading. Dr. Smith, does your panel represent the larger research community or a certain subset of that community?
I suppose it depends on how you define research.
So one might argue that your panel represents a certain kind of research.
Yes.
Is Dr. Helen Campbell's kind of research represented on that panel?
No, and it should not be. Her research is not sufficiently systematic, reliable, or unbiased.
Standards set by your panel?
Standards set by the field of investigation and validated by our panel.
Which deny equally reliable forms of research governed by other panels. Dr. Smith, thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Dr. Parrish, you are the editor of the Journal of Research in Literacy Education. Please describe for us this journal.
Our journal publishes scholarly research articles in literacy education and is viewed as quite prestigious in light of its authorship.
Is your journal consistent with the definition of scientific reading research as outlined in the Reading Excellence Act?
We publish articles consistent with those standards, yes.
Not all of your articles?
Some articles are drawn from different forms of research.
Have you published Dr. Campbell's work?
Yes.
Does her research meet the standards for research detailed in the Reading Excellence Act?
I would not compare it to those standards. It's really a different kind of research.
Please answer the question.
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Dr. Parrish, are we to understand that your journal publishes a range of research?
Yes.
So you don't restrict your journal to articles that meet the scientific standard as it has been described here?
No.
Are articles that don't meet the scientific standard considered less valid?
We don't think so. There's a range of definitions for the meaning of scientific research.
So Dr. Helen Campbell's research satisfies your definition?
Yes, as well as many of our reviewers.
Thank you.
Dr. Lambert, you were involved in the development of the definition of scientifically based research when you chaired a group to review it for the Educational Research Association of America, that's ERAA. Can you describe for us that organization?
ERAA is the largest educational research association in North America.
Did your group unanimously support the definition?
Overwhelmingly.
Thank you.
Dr. Lambert, how was membership of this committee determined?
Well, I nominated individuals.
Was the group representative?
We all supported those kinds of definitions.
So are there members of the larger ERAA who might disagree with those kinds of definitions?
Perhaps, but that would defeat the purpose.
Defeat the purpose.
Defeat unanimity. I wanted a group that could agree.
Did any members of the group have connections to commercial publishers or businesses that may have profited from these current definitions of reading or scientific research?
I have no clue.
So the possibility exists?
Technically, I suppose.
Yet you are not aware of any such affiliation?
No, not personally.
No further questions.
Dr. Dunn, what is the relationship you have with the accused?
I'm the Assistant Dean of the College of Education, and Dr. Campbell was my colleague when I was a faculty member of her department.
You worked closely together?
Yes, in preparing teachers.
Did her coursework meet the state guidelines?
Absolutely.
This includes abiding by the definitions in the Reading Excellence Act?
Yes, of course.
Were you aware that Dr. Campbell was including material that was inconsistent with the Act and with the definition?
No, but it came to my attention after some time.
How did you become aware?
I received complaints from students. They were upset that they had not passed the assessment test for teacher knowledge because Helen had not covered the material. Naturally, I was concerned.
Did you take any action?
I spoke to Helen, but in the end it was decided to refund the students who had to redo the coursework. Dr. Campbell was informed that she had to include the material in the course, and she received a formal reprimand.
Did she make any adjustments to her course content?
I'm unaware.
Thank you.
Dr. Dunn, I appreciate the difficult position that you must find yourself in. Do faculty members usually include in their course materials that vary from the state guidelines?
Indeed, they usually cover more material than the state guidelines suggest.
Does Helen Campbell's approach help her teachers become more critical of research and the definitions of reading?
Possibly.
Do you consider the test of teacher knowledge to be comprehensive?
No, no test can be.
So an excellent teacher could perform poorly on the test. Someone like yourself, for instance.
I don't know. Possibly.
Dr. Dunn, are you aware of the university guidelines for academic freedom?
I believe I am.
Let me refresh your memory. Section A reads, teachers have the freedom to discuss material that is relevant to the subject matter as defined by the course syllabus. And in B, it asserts that teachers have the responsibility to encourage students and colleagues to engage in free discussion and inquiry. Does this policy apply to Dr. Helen Campbell?
Yes.
So Dr. Helen Campbell has the right to discuss materials that she deems relevant, and in fact, she has the responsibility to encourage free discussion and inquiry.
Well, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn.
Thank you, Doctor. You may step down. Does the prosecution have any more witnesses to call?
Not at this time, Your Honor.
Then would the defense please call upon their first witness?
Dr. Williams, you are well known at State University. You're an expert in linguistics as well as the social and political nature of education. Your research publications extend from academic audiences to the public. Can you describe for us what are your interests precisely?
Much of my research focuses on how ideas are represented. We can consider this the rhetoric of research. That is to say, I like to examine researchers' tendencies to give the impression that their research is objective through the language they use.
I don't understand. I assume that objectivity in research is either present or not.
Objectivity is not straightforward. Language plays a substantial role in determining whether or not research is objective.
You are speaking of the art of persuasion.
Not unlike that of the art of law.
Touché. Dr. Williams, can you tell us what is your relationship to Dr. Helen Campbell?
I do not know her personally, but I was asked to review her research papers before appearing here today.
And how would you describe her scholarship?
Her work is interpretive. She employs a sociolinguistic approach to examine and critique literacy teaching practices and related issues.
Do you consider Helen's work to be true science?
Well, I disagree that there's any form of true science. Historically, the notion of true science has been used by one group of individuals, mostly psychologists, to distinguish their work from the work of others. I believe that there are many forms of science and that Dr. Campbell uses one of them.
How would you describe the discrediting of Dr. Helen Campbell's research on the basis that it is non-scientific?
Declaring oneself as scientific and another group as non-scientific is a way of reinforcing one group's power over the other.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, for your candor.
Dr. Williams, do you consider yourself as doing true science?
I consider my research to be true in terms of providing critiques and suggesting alternate possibilities.
Based upon the definition of true science in the legislation, should we consider Dr. Campbell's work to be scientific?
The definition of science in the legislation is inappropriate for judging the merits of Dr. Campbell's work. Her work is one of many different forms of science.
Let me ask you again. Does Dr. Campbell's work meet the definition of science in the Reading Excellence Act?
No.
Ms. Marshall, what is your relationship to Dr. Campbell?
She was my university professor.
You are aware that Dr. Campbell has been charged with failing to meet state guidelines and ultimately failing to meet the needs of her students. In your experience, did Dr. Campbell undermine your teaching?
No. She encouraged us to think critically. She allowed for different viewpoints. And she helped to show us that classrooms can support children's literacy.
Following your experience in Dr. Campbell's classroom, did you feel prepared to teach?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall.
Ms. Marshall, did Helen Campbell provide you evidence from scientific research which supported certain practices over others?
Dr. Campbell encouraged us to question all practices and all possible options.
So she did not support certain best practices?
She helped us develop our understanding of a variety of practices.
Ms. Marshall, how well did your students perform on the proficiency test in your district? How many fourth graders failed to pass this test?
Approximately 45% of the students in my school failed the test last year.
How well did they perform the year before?
The same or a little less.
Is your school enlisting any special programs to help your students do better on this test? And if so, what are they?
The district has adopted a new program which is closely aligned to the test. We are now required to teach.
Is this program considered a best practice?
The district thinks so, but I don't consider it to be.
Did Dr. Campbell contribute to your distrust of this test?
She encouraged us to think of other
No
types.
further questions.
Dr. Layton, you are a well-respected professor at State University. You're president of the ABC. Can you tell us your views on recent developments in reading research?
Yes, at ABC we have 40,000 members who are involved in both professional development and research initiatives. Our views on such matters as high-stakes testing, the selection and imposition of best practices, and the Reading Excellence Act is simply that they are wrong-headed. In fact, ABC has developed several resolutions to address concerns over federal and state agendas.
Doctor, can you describe for us these resolutions?
Yes, the resolutions state that we do not support the idea that any Congress or state legislative body can mandate a particular methodology for the teaching of reading, either in classrooms or in teacher preparation programs. Rather, we feel that learning is enhanced through multiple perspectives and experiences. We have, in fact, 2 recent resolutions strongly opposed the use of high-stakes testing. And we are particularly opposed to the use of such tests as the sole determinant of students' progress.
Doctor, can you tell us what your position is on the Reading Excellence Act?
Our organization has serious concerns about such committees as the reading panel, who tend to represent only dominant research groups. Without alternative perspectives, the reading panel is simply reinforcing the dominant culture and silencing diversity.
Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Layton, was it not your organization that pushed for supporting standards in language arts and reading? Wouldn't you consider standards of this nature supporting a dominant culture?
Yes, I would.
Are you not contradicting your earlier statement by opposing the standards set by the reading panel? Are you suggesting that we should now drop standards and not expect teachers to be accountable?
I don't believe that I am. Standards themselves do not impose dominant cultures. I believe that standards should inform teachers and students, but they should not be used as prescriptions for practice. The current use of standards in high-stakes assessment have created a form of test-driven teaching. And in terms of accountability, it's the legislation of certain practices over others that undermines teachers' professional judgment.
Should teacher preparation courses ensure that prospective teachers know the reading and language arts standards?
They should examine them critically.